Shattered Foundation's Victoria Chen had always believed in the permanence of beautiful things. As the senior curator at Boston's prestigious Whitmore Gallery, she'd spent the last decade of her life preserving, protecting, and presenting masterpieces to the world. She understood the language of brushstrokes and the weight of history. She could spot a forgery from across a room and authenticate a Renaissance sketch with a single glance. But she had been utterly blind to the fraud living in her own home. Marcus Webb had been her husband for 8 years. They'd met at a gallery opening in Cambridge, where he'd been a charming entrepreneur with big dreams about revolutionizing digital marketing. Victoria had been captivated by his energy, his ambition, his apparent passion for life. She'd supported him through failed ventures and late nights, through the lean years when her salary kept them afloat. When his company finally gained traction, she'd celebrated alongside him, genuinely happy for his success. Their Beacon Hill townhouse was filled with carefully chosen art pieces, each one selected during their travels together. The Moroccan tile in the kitchen, the vintage French mirror in the hallway. Every object told a story of their shared life. Victoria had thought they were building something lasting, something as enduring as the art she devoted her life to preserving. She was 7 months pregnant when Marcus came home early on a Tuesday afternoon. Victoria had been in the nursery, hanging delicate watercolor prints of woodland creatures above the crib. She'd turned at the sound of his footsteps, smiling, ready to show him the progress she'd made on their daughter's room. His face was stone. "We need to talk, Vic." The casual abbreviation of her name, which she'd always found endearing, suddenly sounded dismissive, cold. She lowered her hands from the frame she'd been adjusting, a flutter of panic beginning in her chest. "I've met someone else," Marcus said, as though he were announcing a business merger. "Her name is Tiffany. She makes me feel young again. Alive. I'm sorry, but I need to be honest with myself about what I want." Victoria's world tilted. "I'm carrying your child. I know. I'll support the baby financially, obviously, but I can't keep living a lie." He'd already packed his bags. They were waiting by the front door like loyal dogs, ready to follow him into his new life. Tiffany Brooks was everything Victoria wasn't. At 26, she was nearly 15 years younger than Victoria's 41. She had 800,000 Instagram followers, a cascade of platinum blonde hair, and a face that seemed permanently arranged in a pouty, photogenic expression. She made her living posting sponsored content about skincare routines, athleisure wear, and luxury travel. Her world was one of ring lights, carefully curated aesthetics, and an endless hunger for validation through likes and comments. Marcus wasted no time integrating Tiffany into his public persona. Within a week of leaving, his social media transformed into a shrine to their relationship. Photographs flooded his feed with aggressive frequency. Tiffany in a bikini on his new yacht, Marcus and Tiffany at exclusive restaurants, the two of them in matching designer outfits at charity events. Each post was a calculated assault, a digital announcement that he'd upgraded his life. The cruelty was methodical. He tagged Victoria in several posts, ensuring she couldn't escape the evidence of his happiness. He even posted a photograph of Tiffany's hand, adorned with an enormous diamond ring with the caption, "When you know, you know." Some people are worth waiting for. Victoria's friends rallied around her with fierce protection. Her best friend since college, Monica Rivera, a criminal defense attorney with a talent for righteous fury, was apoplectic. "He's a narcissistic sociopath," Monica declared, pacing Victoria's living room like a caged tiger. "We should destroy him. I know people. I can make his life very difficult." But Victoria couldn't find the energy for revenge. She was drowning in a grief so profound it felt physical, a weight pressing on her chest that made breathing difficult. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder of life continuing despite devastation. She spent her days moving through a fog, mechanically preparing for motherhood while her heart remained shattered. The gallery gave her a leave of absence. She retreated to her townhouse, avoiding social engagements, ignoring the pitying looks from neighbors. She sat in the nursery for hours, surrounded by carefully chosen furniture and unopened baby clothes. wondering how she would raise a child alone while her ex-husband paraded his new life across the internet. When Amelia was born on a rainy October morning, Victoria held her daughter and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not more breaking, but the beginning of something new. This tiny, perfect human needed her. Needed her to be strong, to be whole, to build a life worth living. Marcus sent a text message 2 days after the birth. "Congrats. Send me the support payment details." Victoria looked at her phone, then at her sleeping daughter, and made a decision. She would not let Marcus's betrayal define her story. She would not be the discarded wife, the tragic figure whispered about at gallery openings. She would rebuild herself piece by careful piece, like restoring a damaged masterpiece. And when she was whole again, the world would see not what she'd lost, but what she'd become. The quiet revolution. The first year of Amelia's life was a study in transformation. Victoria discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known existed, born from the simple necessity of caring for another human being. The sleepless nights, the endless cycles of feeding and changing, the moments of overwhelming tenderness, all of it pulled her forward, away from the wreckage of her marriage and toward something she couldn't yet name. She returned to work at the Whitmore Gallery after 6 months, but something had shifted in her perspective. The institution she'd devoted herself to suddenly felt constrictive, bureaucratic. She'd spent years championing established artists, following the safe path of recognized names and proven investments. Now, with Amelia asleep in a carrier against her chest during her home office hours, Victoria found herself drawn to something different. The raw, unpolished voices of emerging artists who had something genuine to say. On a cold March afternoon, while Amelia napped in her stroller, Victoria visited a cramped studio space in a converted warehouse in Somerville. A young painter named Jesse Kim had sent her a portfolio that sparked something in her curator's instinct. His work was visceral, emotional, abstract landscapes that somehow captured the feeling of grief and renewal simultaneously. "I can't pay you for representation," Jesse said apologetically, gesturing at his modest studio. "I'm barely covering rent with my day job at the bookstore." Victoria studied the canvases lining the walls, feeling that old familiar electricity of discovering something important. "I'm not looking for payment," she said slowly, an idea crystallizing. "I'm looking for artists who are making work that matters. Would you be interested in being part of a new kind of gallery? Something more intimate, more focused on the art than the market?" By summer, Victoria had done the unthinkable. She'd resigned from the Whitmore and opened her own space. The Chen Gallery occupied a beautifully renovated brownstone in the South End, with soaring ceilings and natural light that flooded through massive windows. It was small, exclusive, and intensely curated. She represented only 8 artists, each one selected for the authenticity and power of their vision. The art world noticed. Within 6 months, Victoria's eye for talent had attracted collectors who valued substance over spectacle. She'd discovered a sculptor whose work explored themes of displacement, a photographer documenting the lives of immigrant communities, a mixed-media artist whose installations addressed climate change with haunting beauty. The Chen Gallery became known as the place where serious collectors went to find the next important voice. It was at the opening of a new exhibition that Victoria met Dominic Ashford. She was adjusting the lighting on a particularly challenging piece when she noticed him standing motionless in front of one of Jesse's paintings, genuinely absorbed. He was tall, with dark hair graying at the temples and an air of quiet concentration. He wore a simple charcoal suit, understated and impeccably tailored. What struck her most was his stillness. In a room full of people performing their appreciation of art, he was actually looking. "It's remarkable," he said softly, sensing her approach. The way he captures that moment between destruction and creation. Like watching a forest after a fire when the new growth is just beginning. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. That's exactly what he was trying to express. Most people see only the chaos in his work. Dominic turned to her, and she found herself looking into eyes of an unusual gray-green color, intelligent and oddly kind. Most people look at art the way they look at everything else, searching for what they already know. It's rare to find work that demands you see something new. They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation flowing with an ease that surprised her. He asked thoughtful questions about her artists, listened intently to her answers, and offered observations that revealed a deep understanding of contemporary art. When he finally introduced himself, the name meant nothing to her. It was Monica who filled in the gaps the next day, her voice rising with excitement over the phone. "Dominic Ashford? Victoria, do you have any idea who that is? He founded Meridian Technologies, the company that revolutionized cloud security. He's worth something like $12 billion. Victoria nearly dropped her coffee. That can't be right. He was so normal. He's famous for being invisible, Monica said. No social media, rarely gives interviews, donates anonymously to about 100 charities. He's like the anti-Marcus. When Dominic called 3 days later to invite her to dinner, Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't ready. She had Amelia to think about. Her life was finally stabilizing, but something in his voice, a genuine warmth, a careful respect, made her say yes. Their first dinner was at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, the kind of place with no pretension and perfect pasta. Dominic asked about Amelia immediately, and when Victoria showed him pictures on her phone, his response was genuine delight rather than polite obligation. "She has your eyes," he said, studying a photo of Amelia laughing in her high chair. That same intensity of focus. Victoria found herself telling him everything: the betrayal, the pregnancy, the painful rebuilding. She hadn't meant to unburden herself, but his attention was so complete, so non-judgmental that the words simply emerged. "I was married once," Dominic said quietly when she finished. "My wife Caroline died 11 years ago. Cancer. We'd been together since college." He looked down at his hands. "For a long time I thought that was it for me. One great love and then just work, charity, filling the hours. But lately, I've been thinking that maybe closing yourself off to possibility is just another kind of surrender." Over the following months, their relationship deepened with a natural, unhurried grace. Dominic integrated himself into Victoria's life with remarkable sensitivity. He met Amelia for the first time at a playground, getting down on the grass to help her build a tower of blocks. He attended gallery openings, always staying in the background, letting Victoria shine. He sent her books he thought she'd enjoy, articles about artists she should know about, and once, a single perfect peony in a simple vase with a note that read, "Saw this and thought of you." Meanwhile, across the continent in Miami, Marcus's carefully constructed paradise was developing cracks. Tiffany's initial excitement about dating a successful entrepreneur had dimmed considerably once she realized that Marcus expected her to actually engage with his life beyond being photographed at events. His attempts to discuss business strategies were met with glazed looks. Her constant need for external validation through social media had become exhausting rather than charming. He found himself thinking about Victoria more frequently. Late at night, unable to sleep while Tiffany scrolled through comments on her latest post beside him, Marcus would remember quiet evenings in their Beacon Hill townhouse. Victoria reading a catalog while he worked on his laptop, the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need constant entertainment. He created a fake Instagram account to follow Victoria. What he found made his stomach turn cold. Her gallery had been featured in Art Forum. She'd been interviewed on NPR about her curatorial vision. And in her personal posts, rare but devastating, he saw glimpses of a life rich with meaning. Amelia's first steps, Victoria laughing with friends at a gallery opening, and then a photograph that stopped his breath. Victoria and a distinguished-looking man at a charity function, his hand resting gently on the small of her back, both of them looking at each other with unmistakable tenderness. Marcus did what he always did when confronted with discomfort. He researched obsessively. Within an hour, he knew exactly who Dominic Ashford was, and the knowledge hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been crowing about his upgrade, posting pictures of bottle service and yacht rentals, Victoria had quietly built a meaningful life and somehow attracted a man whose wealth and influence made Marcus's success looked like a child's lemonade stand. The invitation to the Metropolitan Art Auction arrived at the Chen Gallery in an embossed envelope. It was the most prestigious event on the art world's calendar, a night when collectors, artists, and cultural elite gathered to raise millions for arts education. Dominic, as one of the major sponsors, had been given a table. He asked Victoria to accompany him with a gentleness that acknowledged what he was really asking. For her to step back into the public eye, to be seen with him, to make their relationship known to the world. Victoria held the invitation, her hands trembling slightly. Monica, visiting with takeout and moral support, watched her carefully. You don't have to go if you're not ready. But Victoria thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, hiding in her townhouse, devastated and defeated. She thought about the gallery she'd built, the life she'd created, the love she'd found. She looked at Amelia, playing contentedly with blocks on the floor, and then at the invitation. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. It's time. The auction night reckoning. The Metropolitan Art Auction was held in the soaring atrium of Boston's Museum of Contemporary Art, a space of glass and steel that seemed to capture and multiply light. The event drew collectors from across the globe, philanthropists whose names adorned museum wings, and artists whose work commanded seven-figure prices. It was a night where wealth whispered rather than shouted, where true power wore understatement like armor. Marcus Webb had moved heaven and earth to secure tickets. His company had been struggling lately. Several clients had jumped ship. His marketing strategies suddenly felt outdated in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. But he'd managed to purchase a table for $50,000, money he could barely afford. He needed to be seen at events like this, needed to network, to remind people he still mattered. And perhaps, somewhere in the desperate corners of his mind, he needed to prove something to himself. Tiffany had been thrilled about the event for entirely different reasons. "It's going to be perfect for content," she'd squealed, already planning her outfit posts, her behind-the-scenes stories, her carefully filtered photographs. She'd hired a professional photographer to follow them for the evening, an expense that made Marcus wince but which he'd approved. Clinging to the illusion that visibility equaled relevance, they arrived in a white Lamborghini, rented for the evening at obscene cost. That looked aggressively out of place among the eye. Understated Teslas and vintage Mercedes lining the museum's entrance. Marcus wore a burgundy velvet dinner jacket with black lapels, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to show his chest, a heavy gold chain glinting in the lights. Tiffany emerged in a dress that could barely be called such, a sheer, crystal-encrusted bodysuit that left almost nothing to the imagination, with a dramatic feathered train that required two assistants to arrange. The photographers on the press line took their obligatory shots with professional courtesy, but Marcus could sense the difference between genuine interest and routine documentation. Still, he posed aggressively, his arm possessively around Tiffany's waist, his smile fixed and desperate. In his mind, the flashes were validation. In reality, they were mere muscle memory from photographers who'd learned to capture everyone, just in case. Inside the museum, Marcus and Tiffany made their way through the cocktail reception. Marcus worked the room with aggressive energy, interrupting conversations to introduce himself, name-dropping connections that grew more tenuous with each retelling. Tiffany drifted toward anyone with a camera, posing constantly, her photographer trailing behind her like a remora following a shark. "Is that Marcus Webb?" Victoria's colleague from her Whitmore Gallery days whispered to a companion near the bar. "God, he's become insufferable. Did you hear what he did to Victoria Chen? Left her while she was pregnant, didn't he? For some Instagram model?" The companion's voice dripped with disdain. "And now look at Victoria. She's built that incredible gallery, and rumor has it she's with Dominic Ashford." "No." The first woman's eyes widened. "The Dominic Ashford?" Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden shift in the room's energy. The casual chatter didn't stop exactly, but it modulated, the way an orchestra might soften to let a solo instrument emerge. People turned, subtly rearranging themselves to create a natural pathway. Dominic Ashford entered with Victoria on his arm, and the contrast to Marcus's arrival couldn't have been more stark. They hadn't come in a rented supercar, but in Dominic's understated black sedan, driven by his longtime driver, Robert. There had been no preening for cameras, no orchestrated poses. They had simply arrived. Dominic wore a classic midnight blue tuxedo, perfectly tailored, with no embellishment beyond a simple white pocket square. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. But it was Victoria who commanded attention. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that seemed to capture and hold light like a jewel. The design was elegantly simple: a fitted bodice, a flowing skirt, a neckline that was sophisticated rather than provocative. Her honey blonde hair was swept up in a classic chignon, with a few deliberately loose tendrils framing her face. She wore minimal jewelry, just pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother and a delicate gold bracelet. Her makeup was understated, highlighting rather than masking her features. She looked like exactly what she was: a woman of substance, of accomplishment, of quiet but absolute confidence. She glowed not with the desperate shine of someone seeking validation, but with the warm radiance of someone who had found peace and purpose. Marcus saw her the moment she entered. He'd been mid-sentence in a conversation with a collector, pontificating about market trends when his words simply evaporated. He stared, his mouth slightly open as Victoria glided past him without a glance. She was speaking with Dominic, laughing at something he'd said, her face animated with genuine joy. The man beside her, Marcus had researched him obsessively, looked at Victoria the way a pilgrim might regard a shrine, with reverence, wonder, and gratitude. "That's Victoria Chen," the collector Marcus had been talking to said, following his gaze. "Brilliant curator. Her gallery is doing extraordinary things."
"You know her?"
Marcus couldn't form words. He watched as people approached Victoria and Dominic, their greetings warm and genuine. Museum board members, renowned artists, collectors whose names appeared in Forbes. These weren't the social climbers and aspiring influencers who populated Marcus's world. These were people of actual accomplishment, and they treated Victoria as an equal, a peer, someone who belonged. Tiffany, oblivious to Marcus's crisis, tugged at his arm. "Babe, there's better lighting over by those sculptures. Come take pictures with me." "Not now," Marcus said, his voice hollow. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Victoria. She was everything he remembered: the grace, the intelligence, the warmth, but somehow more. She'd been beautiful when he left her. Now she was luminous. She'd been accomplished. Now she was celebrated. She'd been his wife. Now she was utterly, completely beyond his reach. The auction itself began at 8 o'clock. The room arranged itself at round tables surrounding a central stage where pieces would be displayed. Marcus's table was in the back, near the kitchen doors. Dominic's table was in the front, center position, reserved for the evening's most significant patrons. As the auctioneer began, Marcus watched Victoria across the crowded room. She leaned over to whisper something to Dominic, who smiled and kissed her temple with casual affection. The gesture was so natural, so comfortable, that it spoke of real intimacy rather than performance. Marcus thought of his own relationship with Tiffany: the constant posing, the carefully orchestrated photographs, the exhausting maintenance of an image that had no substance beneath it. The centerpiece of the auction was a newly discovered early work by a now famous artist Victoria had championed in her Whitmore days. The bidding opened at $500,000. Marcus watched as Dominic raised his paddle, driving the price up with calm, measured bids. When he won the piece at $2 million, the room erupted in applause. Dominic immediately announced he was donating the painting to the museum's permanent collection, to be displayed in their education wing. "That's a gift of over $2 million, Tiffany whispered to Marcus, her eyes wide. That's insane." Marcus said nothing. He was watching Victoria's face, seeing the pride there, the joy at Dominic's generosity. This was what real wealth looked like. Not rented Lamborghinis and bottle service, but the power to make meaningful change without needing recognition for it. During the break between auction segments, Marcus saw his opportunity. Or perhaps it was compulsion rather than opportunity. the self-destructive urge to press on a bruise to confirm it still hurts. He made his way across the room, weaving through clusters of conversation, until he stood before Victoria's table. "Victoria," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She turned, and for a moment her face registered surprise. Then something else settled over her features. Not anger or hurt, but a kind of calm neutrality, as though she were regarding a stranger whose name she couldn't quite place. "Marcus," she said pleasantly. "Hello." Dominic had risen from his chair, positioning himself subtly beside Victoria. He didn't touch her possessively or glare at Marcus with masculine territoriality. He simply stood there, present and protective, a wall of quiet strength. You look amazing," Marcus stammered. "I saw the article about your gallery. Very impressive. Thank you." Victoria's voice was polite, nothing more. "How are you?" The question was perfunctory, the verbal equivalent of acknowledging someone you'd met once at a conference. Marcus realized with a sick jolt that she didn't care about his answer. He wasn't important enough to her for his well-being to matter. He'd been erased from her emotional landscape as thoroughly as a pencil sketch under fresh paint. "I'm good. Great, actually. Business is good." The lies tasted like ash. "And Amelia? How is she?" At the mention of her daughter, something genuine flickered in Victoria's expression. "She's wonderful." Walking now, trying to form sentences. "She's with my mother tonight. I'd love to see her sometime. Meet her properly." Victoria's smile remained pleasant, but gained an edge of steel. "You've had a year and a half to arrange that, Marcus. You sent a text message when she was born asking for payment details. You've never once asked to be part of her life. I'm not going to discuss this here." Dominic placed a gentle hand on Victoria's shoulder. "We should get back to our table," he said quietly. Then, to Marcus, with perfect politeness that somehow conveyed absolute dismissal, "Nice to meet you." As they walked away, Marcus stood frozen, watching them rejoin their table. He saw Victoria lean into Dominic, saw him whisper something that made her laugh, saw her kiss his cheek in response. He saw what he'd thrown away, and worse, he saw what he'd never actually possessed. Not really. He'd had Victoria's love, yes, but he'd never valued it. He'd treated it like one more asset to leverage, one more possession to upgrade when something shinier appeared. He returned to his own table, where Tiffany was scrolling through her phone, reviewing the photos her photographer had taken. "Look at this one," she said, showing him a picture of the two of them. "I look amazing, but you need to smile more." "You look miserable." Marcus looked at the photograph, the two of them dressed in their desperate finery, their smiles performative and hollow. Then he looked across the room at Victoria, who was engaged in animated conversation with a gallery owner, her face alight with genuine passion as she discussed art. For the first time since he'd left her, Marcus understood exactly what he'd done. He hadn't upgraded. He'd downgraded so catastrophically that he couldn't see the bottom. He'd traded a Rembrandt for a poster, a symphony for a jingle, a woman of depth and substance for a pretty collection of pixels on a screen. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Marcus went through the motions, clapping when appropriate, forcing smiles, pretending interest, while his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. He'd spent 18 months building a facade of success and happiness, posting it online, shouting it to anyone who would listen. And in one evening, in one devastating encounter, he'd been forced to confront the hollow truth beneath it all. As the event concluded and guests began to depart, Marcus watched Victoria and Dominic leave together. Dominic's hand rested on the small of Victoria's back, guiding her gently through the crowd. She looked up at him, said something that made him laugh, and Marcus saw in that moment everything he'd lost and everything he'd never truly understood about love. In the parking lot, as he and Tiffany climbed back into their rented Lamborghini, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Victoria. She was standing beside Dominic's sedan, and he was draping his jacket over her shoulders against the cool evening air. She smiled up at him with such tenderness, such complete trust, that Marcus felt something break inside his chest. "That was so boring," Tiffany complained beside him, already reviewing her photos. "At least I got some good content." "Did you see how many people were staring at my dress?" Marcus said nothing. He started the car, the engine roaring aggressively in the quiet night, and drove away from the museum. Behind him, in the rearview mirror, he could see Victoria and Dominic still standing together, unhurried and at peace, before they too disappeared into the night. He'd thought he'd won by leaving her. He'd thought he'd claimed victory by trading stability for excitement, depth for surface beauty, substance for spectacle. But tonight had proven what he'd been too arrogant and shallow to understand. You can't win when you've already lost everything that matters. Victoria. Chen had risen from the ashes of his betrayal like a phoenix, not through revenge or spite, but through the simple act of becoming fully, magnificently herself. And Marcus Webb, the man who'd thought himself so clever, so superior, was left with nothing but the hollow echo of his own emptiness and the devastating knowledge that he'd thrown away the only real thing he'd ever had. The end.